All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this is the last APHUG video. After today's video, you have learned everything that is deemed to be important by me for this class. So all we've got left is a bunch of review for the AP exam after these last 3 words. So I hope that it's been an enjoyable journey. I know that I miss being in class with you guys, but I am glad that I get to chat with each of you at least twice a week. And thank you to those of you who came to the Friday review sessions. That was really fun for me. And so we're going to do these last 3 words about development, and then that's going to be the end of this chapter. There are 3 words in lesson 7.9. The first word is Human Development Index. The second word is Rostow's Development Model. And the third word is Dependency Theory. This whole unit has been about the economy, and the overarching theme has been how do countries reach development. So our first word is an index that is created by the UN to show us if countries are developed or not. And then the other 2 words are theories about how countries can become developed countries. A lot of the time in economics, we just discuss how wealthy a country is by how much they produce and sell, and then we call that a developed country, right? The countries that have the most production and make the most money, they must be the most developed. Well, the UN decided that wasn't the full picture of whether or not a country was wealthy. Because, for example, if you have a lot of money, but you're not actually investing it in your people, and we just do a simple GDP per capita calculation, but we find that maybe that money isn't really being put back into the well-being of your people, then is that country really developed? So that's why the UN created the Human Development Index. So the Human Development Index decides to use 3 different criteria to decide how developed a country is. The first criteria is that people are able to live a long and healthy life. The second is knowledge, meaning how accessible is school. And the third is a decent standard of living, which is measured by the wealth of the country. So how does the UN decide if people have a long and healthy life? They look at the life expectancy. Okay, so for the category of long and healthy life, the indicator is the life expectancy at birth. When someone is born, demographers decide based on the healthcare conditions of that country, they're going to predict how long that person will live. Obviously, if you have a higher life expectancy, it means you have better healthcare. And a lower life expectancy means less healthcare, or maybe also, based on past predictors, maybe there's a lot of epidemic disease in that country that is causing life expectancy averages to be a lot lower than in some other countries. Okay, the second category is knowledge. So the UN looks at 2 things here. They look at the expected years of schooling that each person is supposed to have in that country, like what is the country's standard requirements, and then they look at the average years of school that people actually attend. Okay, so they look at those 2 numbers. What's the expected amount of school you're to have in that country, and then what is the actual average amount of schooling that everyone has in that country. For the decent standard of living, they use something called the GNI. So GNI is gross national income. So of course, remember that gross doesn't mean, ew, gross. Gross means the whole total. So the gross national income. This is a little bit different than GDP that we've learned about before, which is the gross domestic product, just because the gross national income also counts money from foreign investors or from foreign sources that might come into the country. So it includes economic aid, or it includes companies that are owned outside the country that might be putting money back into the system. So gross national income, economists just feel like it gives a little better picture of how much money that country is making. Then of course we're going to divide it up per capita on average to say that each person has access to approximately this much money per year, although remember that's just an average, and we're going to adjust it for the purchasing power parity. All right, so the numbers that we're going to look at are adjusted to help us have a better idea in US dollars how much these countries are making. So the regular exchange rates, these numbers have been adjusted to show us how, what they're getting in terms of like how much we would understand you can really buy with that money. So maybe it would really be $600, but we're adjusting it to $900 because in that country, $600 really buys you $900 worth of stuff in the United States. Okay then, so every year the UN takes these 4 factors and they make a bunch of indices and they decide which country ranks as the highest on their list and the lowest on their list. All right, so this year, which we're gonna count 2019 since this year's not over yet. So the top country, the country that ranked the highest in the Human Development Index was Norway, second was Switzerland, and third was Ireland. Okay, the countries that ranked in the bottom 3 as the least developed are Chad, Central African Republic, and Niger. Those are the countries that ranked the least on this list this year. So then I also wanted to put up for you some pictures. So this is since 1990 until 2018. This gives you a really broad view of development over time in all of the countries that the UN plots. I want you to see a couple things here. So I've highlighted Norway, so you can see that Norway has been at the top since 1990. You can see that Niger has certainly been at the bottom since 1990, but that overall there has been a steady increase in the numbers of Niger. Now, you can see that the rest of the world is also developing kind of at a similar rate to Niger, so it's not far behind, but it's still at the bottom. But then I also wanted to highlight some other lines so that you can see that things like war can certainly stop the development of a country. If you look at the line from Rwanda, you can see that the 1994 Civil War genocide really hurt the country in that time. Or also, if we look at the line from Syria, you can see that the current civil war is holding them back from development right now. So I just want us to remember that development is not always just a straight trajectory up to the healthy, wealthy corner of the world. But corruption and war can definitely make a roller coaster ride sometimes for people living in these different countries. Okay, so don't think that development is always just up, up, up. The factors in countries can change that, and countries can go down in development, but they can always go back up too. So the Human Development Index is just an index, right? It's not telling you how to become more developed. It's just saying these countries are developed based on the criteria of life expectancy, schools, and gross national income. But it's not saying here's a formula for how to become more developed. It's just plotting them on a list. So the next 2 words, we're going to look at some economists who had theories about how countries can become more developed. Our first economist is Walt Rostow, and so he had the Rostow Development Model. This is in the 1960s, and he's an American economist. So he looked at what Western countries did to become developed, and he created a 5-step plan. He said that other countries could follow if they also wanted to be developed. All right, the first level is called the traditional society. So he basically just reminds us that all of the countries that are not yet developed are probably starting off with the characteristics of most of the people are in the primary sector of the economy. That is, a lot of people are employed in subsistence farming or maybe even hunting and gathering in that country. So he said that was level 1, a traditional society. Level 2, he calls preconditions for takeoff. So overall, there's a lot of allusions to an airplane a little bit in this development model. All right, so we're getting ready to take off. Well, what do you need in order to take off? So the preconditions, right? The things that need to be in place before your economy can begin to be developed. Well, he says that you need to have manufacturing industry begin in your country. and that the country begins to think beyond just their own borders, but they start to think internationally. Okay, so level 2 is preconditions for takeoff. You need to have some manufacturing and a forward-thinking outlook to international ideas. All right, level 3, he calls the takeoff. So now the plane is taking off, and this is a period of a lot of activity. So you have urbanization is going to increase as people move to the city to work in factories, and industrialization is also increasing because you have a lot of technological breakthroughs at this time. Okay, so the third one is takeoff. The country is beginning to manufacture a lot, and all the people moving to the cities. So this would be like America's Industrial Revolution, like in the 1870s or something. This is the takeoff time. Okay, step or level 4, he called the drive to maturity. So industry diversifies, investments made in infrastructure, and overall the quality of life for the people is extended over time. Okay, so drive to maturity, industry diversifies, so you get different kinds of industry, and investment is made to make sure that those infrastructure systems are in place, because remember that without the infrastructure, you won't be able to attract the companies to your country. Okay, and the quality of life of people should be improving over a long period of time. So that's the drive to maturity stage. All right, then he said the final step, or the last stage, is called the age of high mass consumption, where mass production feeds consumer demands. So your country has made it to development, you make all sorts of things, and everybody is concerned with buying all of those things, and your economy is working. Overall, you can see that Rostow had read and knew about David Ricardo's theory that we talked about. Remember, he was back from like the 1700s, where he had the comparative advantage theory that your country should focus on things that you can be the best at making, where you don't have to give up a lot. So this is the same kind of idea. Walt Rostow thought that each country should decide what they should focus on making instead of trying to make everything. If you focus on making a few things in that level 2 and level 3, and then you can put all your resources into that, and you can be really good at exporting those products, that is how your country could make a lot of money. Okay, so the goal here is that you just focus on a few industries as your basic foundational industries, and you make a lot of money through those by exporting them to the rest of the world, and then you'll be able to have a high consumer service economy like the truly developed countries. Okay, so focus on just a few things, and that was the key to success according to Walt Rostow. Okay, so now we'll look at just a few criticisms. So first of all, as time has gone on, people have said, I don't know, Mr. Rostow, your theory is a little too focused on the West, right? It's too focused on what Americans and Europeans think is the best. Does every country need to become a mass consumption society in order to be called developed? So people question the whole premise of it. Is, being developed the prize at the end? Is it being just like the United States or Western Europe? Or is there something else involved in being truly a developed country? That's criticism number 1, too Western focused. Criticism number 2 is that people say that the theory does not take into account the colonial legacy that many countries in Africa and Asia face, where the Western world came in the 1800s and took over a lot of industries and resources and brought them back to their countries. They say that this theory forgets that some of the industries and natural resources are still owned by those imperial colonial countries. And then criticism number 3 is they say that Walt's theory forgets about government corruption. Sure, it sounds nice. Put your money into making a few industries and then sell those products to the world, and soon you'll be a developed country. But if the government is corrupt and is stealing all the tax money and not putting it into infrastructure and building new factories, then how will your country ever become developed? So they say that Walt Rostow forgot about government corruption in his theory.
Okay, thank you. Lay down, lay down, lay down. You're not laying down. Down, lay down. That's better. Whoa, that was a big piece. And you want the rest? Sit, sit. Yummy, yum, yum.
All right, word number 3 is dependency theory. All right, so Rostow had his theory about how you could become a developed country. And then some other economists, especially South American economists, they saw that, and then they looked at the conditions in South America, and they said it's just not happening. These countries are not able to follow Rostow's model of development, and they're staying undeveloped year after year after year. So what's up with that? Maybe there's some other reason why they're not becoming developed countries. So there was an Argentinian economist whose name was Raul Prebisch, and he also is writing in the 1950s and 1960s, and he has a different theory about what is going on with development in the world. So Prebisch's main premise is that there's an international system out there that is hindering growth, right? So if you think about those core countries versus the periphery countries, or developed versus developing, he says there's a relationship there that is stopping the developing countries from ever becoming developed countries. And the problem is that they are, just like the name says, the developing countries are dependent on the developed countries. And so his idea is maybe it's not possible to break out of this cycle. Maybe this economic imperialism that we have now in the 21st century is going to stay with us forever. In the dependency theory, you have to understand that he said there was a cycle of dependency. So here's how it would work. Countries from the Western places in the world, so the developed places, they give the money through foreign direct investment or loans, like we talked about in previous lessons. So they give that money to the developing country. The developing country is able to produce things. Then the developing country is able to make some money and sell those things, right? But then that money that they've made, they do 2 things with it. Number 1, they have to pay off those loans that they got from the developed countries. And number 2, the people in those countries are now exposed to the international market, right? They want all those consumer goods that the West has. So any money that is made extra goes into buying things from the Western countries. So now the country just gave all their money that they made to the Western countries. So who's really making money here is the Western countries, or the developed countries, and not the developing countries. So Prebisch said that there's just a cycle going on here. Then, if the developing country wants to make more money, they have to ask more money from the developed countries for more loans to put into their country in order to be able to build new things. So he just sees it as a complete circle over and over again, right? All of the money that the developing countries make, they give it right back to the developed countries, and then they need more money, and so then more money comes in and more money goes out, and it just keeps this cycle. And so the question is, how do you break out of that cycle? What do you think, Ishmael? Meow. Nothing distracts her from the food. All right, so we got to break out of the cycle of economic imperialism that Prebisch and other people would say is caused by the transnational corporations who are coming in and setting up shop, and then all of that money is really just going back into the pockets of the rich countries. So the book talks about 5 ways that potentially countries can get out of this cycle of dependency. First is that you could require the companies to deposit money in local banks. So instead of just putting any money that they earn back like into American banks, you can force the companies through different legislation to put money in banks in that country. And then, those banks can loan out money, they can make some money off of the interest. So it's one way to keep money in the country. Secondly, economists say that the countries should really invest in manufacturing simple goods in their own country. That way people will buy those things and not need to buy the European or American brand, right? Like one example was just that like you should make soap in your own country. That way you're not always importing soap from the US or Europe, right? So make super simple things in your own country and don't become dependent on importing those things from the United States or Europe. And that's another way to get out of this cycle. The third way they said was to nationalize your natural resource industries. If you're allowing the foreign companies to come in and take over your industries, you're going to lose a lot of money, especially like diamond mines or things like that, right? So the economists say that the countries should make sure that their country owns those particular products. Fourth way is the special economic zones that we talked about already. So in that, the country and the company share some benefits and a lot of the money can stay with the country. So that's another thing economists say. And then lastly, they say that developing a lot of tech industries is another way out of this, which we saw with the Asian tiger countries, right? You make a lot of tech, you sell it to the developed countries, but if all of those factories and businesses are owned by, say, like South Korea, you're keeping all of the money inside of your country. Okay, so those are 5 ways that economists say that countries are able to break out of the dependency cycle. All right, guys, well, this is the end of an era. We've learned everything in APHUG, and it's been a little over a month since we started this at-home learning video thing, and so I hope that you've enjoyed going at your own pace and pausing me or maybe fast forwarding me. I don't really know what you're all doing over there, but no matter what, I hope that you've enjoyed a little independency in your learning, and it's been fun making the videos. I know that I've learned a ton, and I felt like I had to research more than usual and make them entertaining for you. So I hope that you enjoyed all of my pet interruptions, and yeah, so you should like this video and you should subscribe, because you never know like what could be next. Yeah, this is the end of APHUG videos, but I don't know, there could be like Miss Hamming does a musical videos, or of course Miss Hamming's big dream to be a travel vlogger. So if you subscribe now, you'll be way ahead of the curve for when I'm famous. You can be like, yeah, I knew her, she was my teacher. All right, guys, so I hope you have a terrific day, and of course I will still see you for at least another month as we review for that wonderful AP exam. All right, see ya.